The information provided by Trading Forex Price Action to you does not constitute personal financial advice. The information provided is of a general nature only and does not take into account your individual objectives, financial situation, or needs. It should not be used, relied upon, or treated as a substitute for specific professional advice.
Hey guys, this is a weekly forecast for March 28th to April 1st of 2022. Okay, let's start off with the pound dollar.
This is a monthly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So since this horizontal trend line right here just became legitimate with its 3 touches at 1, 2, and 3 right here, and since price has a tendency to want to test strong levels in the long term, I'm long biased right back up to this horizontal trend line. And moreover, since there was trend line confirmation of long strength from this trend line, from this pivot to this pivot right here, right at this price level right here, in the medium term, I'm also long biased right back up to this pivot high right here. Okay, let's talk entries. This is a weekly chart. Let me run you by what's been happening on this pair for the last couple of months. So there was a strong short trade that formed right here, and then a weak short trade formed right here. And so at this point, the bias was short. Or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot low before reaching this pivot high. And that main target was hit right here. And then following that, there was actually a strong long trade that formed right here, which was stronger than this previous short trade right here. And so the bias became long. Or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And so price exploded all the way up to these levels close to that main target, where actually another weak short trade formed right here. And so at this point, the bias remained long. However, price was now likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And then as price ranged about roughly for a month in this area, the monthly chart made a new trend line that runs right through these levels that became a target for this previous long bias and changed the bias into short. And at that point, the bias was now stating that price is likely to reach this pivot low before reaching this pivot high. And that main target was hit right here. And so at this point, I'm waiting for another weekly long trade to form so I could gauge the strength of it against the prior short trade, which was right here, and come up with a new weekly bias, whether long or short. Now, moreover, like I mentioned on the overview, I would much rather have a new weekly long bias to form, for that is along with that long-term view of long strength. So let me explain in more detail why I think the long-term view of this pair is long. So let's go back to the monthly chart. Okay, so back on this monthly chart, again, try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now, as you can see right here, there was a breakout, an immediate break back in, which signals normal short strength. However, right after that, price came right back up to stop out the price level where that normal short strength was created. Now that signals strong long strength. Okay, and in my opinion, I think this long strength on this monthly chart still has a ways to go. Alright, so that's the basic reasoning behind the long-term view of this pair's long bias. Okay, and that said, I did mention before that there was a fake weekly double top that reached this target height level, roughly in these areas right here, which also signals strong short strength. However, that is on the weekly chart. And as you guys know, a basic rule in terms of strength is that the higher the time frame that the signal was on, the stronger strength it creates. So in this case, since there was monthly strong long strength, that would override the strength from a weekly strong short strength. Alright, so let me wrap this up on the weekly chart. Okay, back on this weekly chart, again, the last short trade that formed was right here. And so at this point, I'll be waiting for a long trade to form on this weekly chart and see if it is stronger than this last weekly short trade right here, and then derive a weekly bias. However, I much rather have a weekly long bias to form, where that's along with that monthly long strength. And hence, although the main target will be at this pivot high, that does open up opportunities for extension targets above. Okay, and moreover, I will be watching for daily biases to form also, but it's the same on the daily chart also. I much rather have a long bias to form. Okay, and I'll keep you guys updated when these biases form. Alright, so let's go on to the euro dollar. Okay, and if you're having trouble understanding what I'm talking about in terms of weekly biases and lower confirmations, please watch my price action trading course, for that course is designed to provide you the necessary information so you can understand how to trade price action. Okay, this is a monthly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So since this price action right here is very strong short, and this move still having a ways to go, in the long term I'm short biased right back down to this pivot low right here. And moreover, although there was a breakout of this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here, and that breakout being right here, and since there is no close back into this trend line as of this moment, but that said, there was confirmation of weekly short strength when price reached these areas right here. At this current moment, I am short biased right back down to this pivot low right here. Okay, let's talk entries. Okay, this is a weekly chart. Let me run you by what's been happening for the last couple of months. So the last major short trade that formed was right here. And before that, there was actually a long trade that formed right here. And this short trade was stronger than this long trade. So the bias was short, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot low before reaching this pivot high. And then moreover, as price fell all the way down to these levels, there were never any signs of strong lower time frame long strength. And so even though price was coming up at this point right here, there were no lower time frames of long strength to support this long move. And then at this point right here, there was actually a new short trade that formed. However, this short trade hit its main target at a monthly gap level that runs right through these levels, which immediately changed this bias into long, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. However, again, even though a new short trade formed, there was still no signs on the lower time frames to support this long move up right here. Okay, and so price fell all the way down to these levels right here, where a monthly trendline retest level exists that I showed you on the overview. And at the current moment again, there is no short-term long strength supporting these moves up. Okay, and moreover, I took out 10% at this monthly trend line of those short positions I took from last year, roughly in this area and another one in this area. And at this point, since there is no long strength kicking back in, I am willing to extend that last remaining 10% even to lower levels at this point. Okay, but in terms of new biases, I'll be waiting for a daily or weekly long trade to form, and then a daily or weekly new short trade to form, and extract the strength of both of these to see which one is stronger and decide on a bias whether long or short. However, that said, since the weekly chart is confirming strong short strength at this moment, again, I much rather have a daily or weekly short bias to form. So again, I could extend these targets to further levels down. Alright, so now let me explain to you how that weekly short strength formed. Okay, so let's get rid of these and zoom out. Okay, so on this weekly chart, there was a fake HNS that formed right here. And this fake HNS actually reached its target height level right at these levels right here. And as you guys know, that shows weekly strong short strength. Okay, so that's the reasoning behind that weekly short strength I was mentioning earlier. And moreover, recall there was a monthly trend line level that runs right through these levels right here, which is a key level in terms of what happens at that level, which will dictate the monthly outlook on the future direction of price. So let me go ahead and share my thoughts about that. Let's go over to the monthly chart. Okay, so on this monthly chart, try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Okay, so whether price this month will break out of this trend line is a key event I'm looking at. However, more important than that is how next month's price reacts after this breakout. So let's say hypothetically there is a breakout of this trend line this month, and then if the next monthly candle immediately breaks back in, again immediately means the breakout candles close and the break in candles open is at the same level. Now that's important because at that point that will show monthly normal long strength. Okay, and there are further signals that can form beyond that, but for now the most important thing that I am watching for is next month's price action, for whether it could immediately close back into this trend line or not will dictate the future monthly direction of future price. Okay, so let me just wrap this up on the weekly chart. Okay, back on this weekly chart, I'll be waiting for a weekly or daily bias to form. So I want a long trade to form and a short trade to form. And then I'll gauge the strength of these to decide a weekly or daily bias, whether long or short. However, like I mentioned earlier, since there is weekly strength looming in the background, I much rather have a daily or weekly short bias to form so I could trade along with this weekly strong short strength. Okay, so let's go on to the Euro Pound. Okay, this is a monthly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So since this trend line right here, from this pivot to this pivot, although it is not a legitimate trend line in terms of confirmation of the future direction of price, is a key level, and since price has the tendency to want to test key levels, in the long term I'm short bias right back down to this diagonal trend line right here. And moreover, on the weekly chart, there was strong short strength confirmed. In the medium term, I'm also short biased right back down to this pivot low right here. Okay, let's talk entries. Okay, this is a weekly chart. Let me run you by what's been happening on this pair for the last couple of months. So there was a weak long trade that formed right here, and then a strong short trade formed right here. So typically the bias will be short. However, this short trade hit its main target at a monthly gap level that runs right through these levels right here. And so the bias was changed into long, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. And that main target was hit right here. And then in the following 2 weeks, there was actually a strong long trade that formed right here and a weak short trade that formed right here. However, this time, this long trade hit its main target through this monthly gap level again right here, changing the bias into short, or in other words, price was now likely to reach this pivot low before reaching this pivot high, and that main target was hit right here. And then price ranged about, came back up, and went back down, where actually a strong long trade formed. And so at this point, the bias was long, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low. However, again, this long bias hit its main target at that monthly gap level again, changing the bias into short, or in other words, price was likely to reach this pivot low right here before reaching this pivot high. And then for the last couple of months, there was actually no weekly biases that formed. Okay, so at this point, similar to the other pairs, I'll be waiting for a weekly or daily long trade to form, then a short trade to form, so I could compare the strength of each and come up with a weekly or daily bias, whether long or short. However, like I mentioned in the overview, there is strong short strength on the weekly chart at this point, so I much rather have a short bias to form so I could trade along that weekly short strength. Now let me just show you what I'm talking about with that weekly short strength. So let me take you to a different weekly chart. Okay, so on this weekly chart, try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now at this point right here, there was a breakout, an immediate break back in, which signals normal, long strength. However, price was able to come right back down to stop out the pivot low where that long strength was created, showing strong short strength. Okay, so at this point right here, this strong short strength was confirmed. And thus I'd much rather have a weekly or daily short bias to form, so I could trade along with this weekly short strength. Okay, and moreover, although weekly strong short strength is indicative of long-term price direction, a similar setup is forming on the monthly chart also, which can possibly override this weekly short strength. So let me just show you what that's about. Let's go over to the monthly chart. Okay, so on this monthly chart, try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now this is similar to the euro dollar, but whether it be this month's candle close or the next month's candle close, we want to see if first of all, price can close under this trend line. Now if price can do that, the next thing I'll be looking for in terms of long-term strength is whether we could get an immediate close back in, which will signal normal long strength. Okay, but first things first, let's just see whether or not we'll get a break out of this trend line to begin with. Okay,
and that's it for the weekly forecast. I hope you guys have a great week. And I just wanted to say, those of you that are affected by the situation in Europe, I hope you guys stay safe and always make health your main priority, because without health, nothing means anything. Okay? All right, so thanks for watching, guys. Bye.